everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Change Management Drives Long-Term Success in a Volatile World. My name is Etty. I'm the Senior Content Marketing Exec here at ILX. We'll just give it another minute or so to join for a few others to sort of filter in and join us. But in the meantime, I will run through a few housekeeping bits before I hand you over to Andy and Richard here. So the first thing is just you'll all have come in muted. If you could please stay that way, it just makes sure that the webinar runs a lot more smoothly so we don't have sort of background noise and a few people kind of interrupting as we're going through. If you do have any questions, there will be a Q&A session at the end. So just pop your questions in the box. It's up in the top right-hand corner. If you do have, like I say, if you do have any questions, just pop them in there and then Andy and Richard will get to them when they get to the end. If they're technical, if you can't see us or hear us properly, I'll be here in the background, so I'll deal with any of those sorts of issues as we're going through. Secondly, the webinar is being recorded. That's a common question we get asked. So yes, it is being recorded. You'll be sent a follow-up email tomorrow with a link so that you can watch that back on YouTube, forward on to any colleagues or sort of let people know if you think they'll also find it useful. It will also be up on YouTube later this afternoon, so you can get it directly over there. On a similar vein, we have a variety of other social channels. So we're active as ILX Group on LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram. So if you're interested in any of our sort of follow-up webinars or any other activity, new courses, things like that, you can find out lots about them over on our social channels. So we do like to say give us a follow. And then, so today's presentation is set to be about 30 to 40 minutes long. And then, as I mentioned, we will have time for that Q&A session at the end. So I shall hand you over to Andy here and Richard. So Andy is one of our ILX trainers, expert in change management, and Richard is the chief examiner for change management at APMG. So they both definitely know what they're talking about when it comes to change management. So I'm sure you'll be in for a very good presentation. Over to the two of you.
Thanks, Etty. Hello, everybody. Andy West. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to have a look at the world we're living in as a starting point. We'll then start to consider what is change management and why it's so important. We'll have a look at how we respond to change and finish by looking at thriving in a fast-paced world. As Etty suggested, if you can put any questions you have into the chat box, we'll deal with them at the end. I'll try and answer all of your questions once we've finished our presentation. And so I'll hand over to Richard to make a start.
Oh, thank you, Andy. And good morning, everybody. I'm really glad that you're here on the webinar. The term VUCA has been widely used in the business world since it was first coined in the 1990s by the American military. But it recognizes just how much our world is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And for those at senior levels in organization, setting and delivering strategy in an environment where things are volatile, they bubble unexpectedly and often at very short notice, where longer term trends are difficult to see and to define, the uncertainty, where there are multiple and very distinct forces acting on our organizations. Issues of reputation have become hugely significant in the last, I guess, 10 years particularly, easily lost and not so easily regained. Just as one issue that may not have figured as high in the past, but recognizing the need to balance that and the profit motive and environmental considerations, which are part of our reputation. And then there's just the ambiguity of signals that we receive from the world around us. It's hard to interpret. And the volatility and uncertainty sound the same thing to me. They're a bit like Donald Rumsfeld's, the uncertain is the known unknowns, and the volatility is the unknown unknowns, because they're the ones that slap you when you're not expecting it. So this is the world in which we're trying to manage change effectively and to give long-term security to our organizations and growth. Does that make sense to you, Andy?
It does. And there's so many examples that you just watch the news in the evening and there was an example I saw today on social media, and it was about what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, which has a long-term impact on how our businesses work. And it was going, is this going to be a ceasefire or is it going to be a war? And then you had the President of the United States saying, I'm not going for a ceasefire. We're going for a ceasefire plus. And everybody went, a ceasefire plus? Is that the one without adverts? And then, but I'm not going to negotiate. And everybody going, he's going for ceasefire plus, but he's not going to. And by those very messages, we don't understand. Now, there's been a similar thing with the tariffs or no tariffs and the value of the tariffs and where they've got them from. And so we have a lot of ambiguity about the direction that the world is facing in and where should we tie our rope to kind of go, where's a little bit of security? And this is part of the world in which we operate. And it's not just what's going on in the UK, it's what's going across Europe, it's going across the world. All of these things have an impact on what or how, or sometimes do we know?
And so economic and energy costs are some of the things that fit into the volatility here. So, Andy, what's change management and how does that relate to this?
Well, change management is that kind of complementary skill. People have been talking about changes, delivering changes in organizations, well, forever. And the focus has always been very much on I'm delivering a capability. Change management is that kind of complementary skill which looks at the people side of all of these things. Have we considered the preparedness of the organization and the individuals in that organization for those sorts of changes? Have we considered the culture of the organization and the either accelerating or decelerating effect that might have on what we want to do and how we might want to do it? And so this is very much that kind of people-focused side of change. It's that complementary skill that says, are people ready, willing, and able to accept the changes we go through? It covers all of those sorts of areas. And one of the things that I bumped into that when I first started working in projects, often people will put in charge of a project, in charge of a change, because they were the technical expert about delivering the thing. And it's always one of those messages that I've thought, well, brilliant. I've got somebody who can give me the right thing, but they're not really thinking about the people on the other side of it. If you want a particularly telling example of this, is when I was first in training, which is quite a while ago, and I did software training for change projects that happened in the organization which I worked. And officially the product, the software has been developed, it's ready to go. And so it's being handed over to me to write the training and get everything prepared. And I wandered in to the training team, to the development team and said, hi, I'm your trainer. I'm here to write the materials for the launch of the new software. Do you have any manuals on it? And they said, yes, we have 15 manuals. I went, fantastic. Which one tells me how to process an order? And their answer was, well, none of them. We didn't think it was important. They had 15 manuals on how they built it, and not one of them had thought how to use it. Not one of them had talked to the frontline users and gone, what do you need? And when I say that, your face was a picture.
Yeah. I think, Andy, just taking the question that you've got at the top of the slide there, and change management is a bunch of capabilities.
Yeah.
It relates to organizational development. It relates to project, program, portfolio management, but it seeks to bridge those in a way that keeps the focus on people and therefore on change that will be sustainable. So it's a capability, and in organizational life, that's typically embedded in a function that has those kind of tentacles locked into complementary parts of the organization to enable the change not only to be thrown over the wall, but also to be embedded sustainably in the way the organization works, and in a way that will carry the organization and its people into the future.
Absolutely. And borne out by that very example, change initiatives will deliver outputs, capability. What tools, equipment, processes, systems, organisation structures do we need for the future? And we can deliver all of those things we want. And some people will adopt them. There are some people who go, oh, there's a new thing. Great, let's go and grab it. But that doesn't sustain across the entire organisation. That doesn't mean that it's fully embedded. And of course, in an organisational sense, that says we don't achieve the benefits, the value that we hope to for incorporating those changes. Because importantly, there must be a reason for change. There must be some kind of improvement from it. And if we're not embedding the change successfully with all of the impacted parties, then we're not going to achieve that kind of long-term goal, the development we want as an organization. And change management is that kind of key that unlocks the buy-in, the commitment. The entire community has bought into that change. It's fully embedded. And it gives us the opportunity to, generate benefits and maintain that kind of benefit delivery over the life of the item that we may have updated. And that is that kind of long-term success. And that's the importance of this. It's that kind of the link between successful delivery mechanisms, but actual proper embedding in the organization, the acceptance and the understanding of change. And that might be an individual thing.
Sorry, I cut across you there, Andy, but just to say that you've described really clearly the link between change management and particular change initiatives. But from the point of view of the organization's long-term success, particularly in a volatile world, the sense of purpose, the sense of vision needs to be coherent. So this is a change leadership issue, and it will always come from the most senior levels and needs to be coherent and believable, because any individual change initiatives, however well embedded, and especially if they're well embedded, actually need to align with a sense of overall direction. Now, in different industries, it may be that we cannot say precisely where the outcome of a particular organizational focus will be. I think of the pharma industry looking at a new potential blockbuster drug, that they may not know exactly which molecules will in the end deliver the value, but they know that there is a direction here that they need to put the resources of the organization into. And very often they do bet the bank on making that direction coherent for all the contributors in the organization. And it's that, with all the individual initiatives around it, that helps to give direction. And the same can be true in any industry. That sense of vision builds trust in people, and it builds a security that we have a direction to go.
I was just going to pick up on one of your earlier points about the ambiguity, because, of course, we may know the direction in which we're going. We know what the end point is at that moment in time, but at least it allows us as an organisation to focus on where we're going as an organisation and to carry things with us. Things don't always line up as perfectly as our slide suggests. There will be some slight variations in it. What we don't want is things going in tangents, in completely different directions. 18 things going in different directions as we go through. And just to kind of pick up your point and pick up from the slide, one of the things that I always found interesting here is that coherent strategy is about layering through the organization. If we haven't got buy-in to that strategy, then the culture of the organization may not be moving in the right direction. And of course, culture can act as a big braking force if we haven't engaged the right people, if we haven't got the right people involved and bought into what's going on. I previously worked for the water company, and one of the things they always insisted on doing to try and implement change was kind of cascade it through the organization to make sure that all layers of the organization understood where we were going and why we we're going in that direction. And interesting, the managing director always used to say that, at the very senior level, I can convince my colleagues. And often at the junior level, there's often people there who are itching for change. But he said, there's often a lump in the middle which has kind of built their little empires, and they're quite happy where they are. And he used to call them the corporate concrete, because they're set in their ways and often in the way. And it's how do we deal with that? And that becomes part of that strategic vision. It becomes part of that engagement process to make sure that we aren't leaving people behind and that the culture supports
Yeah.
our strategy.
There's two things I'd like to respond on that, Andy. One is I wouldn't want to, anything you just said, while I think it can be true, I had a previous boss who described it as the blotting paper layer in communication terms. But I wouldn't want that to trash all
No.
those layers of line management who really want to make the organization a success, sustained high performing people in the middle of the organization, but giving them additional training, additional insights into the impact of change and the way that they can help and support people through change for the long-term good of the organization is
Yes.
one major way that top management can make sure that the organization is change ready and change agile. That's one
Yes.
thing. The second thing I wanted to pick up was culture. And you're spot on with your comments about the significance of culture. There is not a single change that will not have some impact on the way people relate, the expectations of people of one another, the values in the organization, and the organization's culture will in reverse affect the way any change is implemented and the way it hits the road with people. So
Yes.
having expertise in the organization is one of the things that you would address as a trainer on the change management course. Um, Having people who have the sensitivity, the awareness of culture to help to line up what's going on in different change initiatives with an overall sense of direction and who can coach those line managers appropriately is a great resource for an organization that's looking to sustain change and success in the long term.
Yeah. And to kind of support that, many years ago, we did a webinar similar to this one on change management, but the subject was the benefit of using middle managers as change agents.
Mm.
And so that the middle managers as a layer, actually, because of their expertise and their knowledge, and often their network across the organization, can be hugely important people in making that strategic change work. And I think it's been one of our most popular webinars in the past because
Sure.
that kind of resonated with the audience of going, well, actually, there's a huge amount of knowledge and skill here that if we can utilize and if we can motivate, that actually they have the power to make things really happen in an organization. And and that's I think a really important point here. So yes, it's kind of it's almost a joke from the previous MD about those sorts of things, but it also gives you the opportunity to go, well, let's challenge that. Let's challenge that idea. Let's challenge that thought and go, well, if we can get these people involved, does it give us some kind of advantage? Let's use that skill and knowledge.
I think the only challenge that I've found in practice with engaging line management, middle management, whatever label you like to put on it,
Mm.
in as change agents, is that they are very, very busy people.
Yes,
And
they
having
are.
some allies, both within their own departments as local change agents who can work with colleagues to help their managers implement change, and having professional change managers around who can offer support, coaching, encouragement, sometimes just a reminder, um, can be the thing that makes the difference with the effectiveness of line management. But
Yes.
absolutely right, line management is key to making change work.
And it's about trying to engage on all that kind of levels we go through. And just going to kind of move us on to keep sure we cover all the things we're supposed to. There's often people go, well, isn't just change management a fancy name for stakeholder engagement, stakeholder management? So we thought we'd reflect this just as this is the definition from the APM's body of knowledge. The systematic identification, analysis, planning, and implementation of actions designed to influence stakeholders. And you go, well, yes, okay, to influence. But does that suggest that we've already got a direction in mind? Does that suggest that, we've made up our mind about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and when we're going to go and do it, and that we're just trying to get people on side? And so it's looking at beyond that, are we engaging people fully in all the appropriate aspects of the project so that it's not just trying to influence them, they're part of the process. They're part of what's going on. And so if I look at the model that talks about delivering change outcomes, we see that there's a far greater engagement process in here as we go through. So we start with the idea of co-design, which is involving all of the interested parties in what is actually needed. So we can translate from strategic vision to individual change initiatives, but it's the engagement with everybody here. So it's not we've made up our mind to what we're going to go and do. It's we need your understanding. We need your input on what we need to make these strategic steps. And that's a much healthier starting point than we're going to tell you what's good for you. Which I suspect we've all seen in the past, and there's a great deal more resistance to it. But of course, if we have that kind of the idea of co-design, then we can start to work out what is it we actually need in terms of these initiatives. What is it we need as a capability or capabilities across the entire organization? And that's absolutely where we need the appropriate delivery teams with the skills and the technical knowledge that we need in order to build those capabilities. But in parallel, change management, the people aspects, the working with those people in the core design, working with those communities so that they are ready, willing, and able, that what we're going to do is actually achievable, possible. And of course, that leads into the payback for the organization, the value we get from these, the sustainable benefits, and often the minimization of disbenefits, the negative effects of change, the disruption, the loss of skill or knowledge as we go through the sorts of things. How are we doing it? And I think that becomes a much better sense of, if like, proper stakeholder engagement. It's not a we do it once we've made up our mind.
No, I totally agree with that critique. I mean, just taking a step back, all the work of social neuroscience over the last 10, 20 years says that there are a bunch of things that trigger threat responses in people. And when that threat response fires off, we are much less able to bring our best selves to work. The cognitive processes get disrupted. We're not able to do our best, not because we're bad people, but because stuff has been triggered in our brain. And the things like how important I am relative to others around me, how much I can rely on established patterns of work, so I don't have to think too hard about what I do because this is semi-automatic. How much control I have in whatever the workspace is, how much trust I have in the people around me, and if this is the sense of fairness. Now, putting those things together, if you go to stakeholders and say, we've decided on this, we're going to show you why it's really important to you. One, you're violating their status, like I've had no stake in this, so we're putting you one down relative to us. Two, you're taking away their autonomy, their agency in the whole change process. You're slapping them with something that is a new way of working, so that they know that their existing patterns, the things that they can do semi-automatically, are going to get lost. Their trust in you is likely to be diminished. So you're hitting a number of triggers that are going to affect them. And I did some work with a bunch of colleagues, kind of skunk works. It wasn't my main job, but a group of us got together and tried to look at what good collaboration would look like throughout a change process. So from collaboratively defining the change, collaboratively generating ideas, collaborating on design, which you've mentioned, collaborating on delivery or production of the change, collaborating on evaluation, ongoing. And because co-design, co-production, co-creation are buzzwords, we coined the term co-change to say the whole thing, really. And we built some principles that would actually work, and actually in terms of social neuroscience, are likely to take people with you in the change. And by the way, tap into the resource of all the stakeholders, because they will have things that could improve the way the organisation works given appropriate opportunities. So effective change managers and the training they get is designed to help
Yep.
the change manager to engage in a collaborative way with stakeholders. Reality of organisational life, there can be confidentiality issues. I do
Yeah.
understand that it's not always straightforward, but the closer you can get to that full co-change, collaborative change model, the
Yep.
more likely you are, A, to take people with you without damage and disruption to your workflow, and B, the more likely you are to be able to sustain this and future changes because trust is built rather than degraded.
And interesting, I'm just thinking about, as you're talking about the potential negative effects from kind of the neuroscience area.
Mm.
There's also the kind of motivational stuff of engaging people. And I was thinking about Daniel Pink, who talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Autonomy. Am I in control of my world? Am I part of this decision-making process? If the answer is yes, I'm going to be much more involved in what's going on. Do I have a say in my destiny, kind of things? Am I learning from this process? Am I getting better? Am I taking something from it? And of course, can I see where I'm making a difference? Purpose. So we can take both sides of that. There's both the kind of things we need to consider from neuroscience, and there's the kind of personal motivation thing that says, well, the more we involve people, the more that we enable them to understand what's going on, the co-change idea, the better it's going to be from both sides.
Sure.
There's still going to be a reaction to change because that's a natural part of our process. But it becomes a more measured response rather than a roller coaster.
Mm-hmm.
So if I leave you a roller coaster to explain.
Yeah, the change curve. Look, this is a very old model of change, and its origins are not in the business world. And it's often criticised. However, it is actually a useful heuristic, recognises the way that people characteristically respond to change. And I want to say this is not just about changes that I don't want. I could walk you through this in relation to the birth of our first daughter, which was she
Yep.
was very much wanted, but there was still that bit of, were we really ready for this when
Yep.
we were carrying this little tot around? And how do we figure out a new way of living, which is going to be ours for the next 18, 20 years? It's
Yep.
not only bad things, it's a natural response that when something changes, particularly if it's unexpected, then we try to hold on to the way it was. We maybe blame the people who are foisting something on us. We maybe feel, well, maybe I had some responsibility in this, and the mood and performance can drop off. We have a time where we're confused, just feeling a bit down, and performance is suppressed, which will continue till the point we accept that there is something that has changed and I've got to engage with it. And then we start to get into the problem solving bit. And just holding that model on the screen, a guy called William Bridges talked about leadership on the change journey very helpfully as learning to let go of the way things have been, of leading through a period of uncertainty, an in-between stage. He called it the neutral zone, doesn't really matter, and then helping people to engage with a new future. And he ticked off four P's that really help people with that. They need, first of all, a purpose. Why are we doing this? They need a picture of how it's going to be at the end. They need a plan, a sense that actually there is a way forward here and I can be part of it.
Yep.
Which is the fourth P, the part to play.
Yes.
So purpose, a picture, a plan, and a part to play. And if you can work with those things, you are actually talking about collaboration.
Yes.
And as leaders, the more we can offer those things to our people, the more likely they are to walk with us on the change journey and actually to contribute to it. And in that neutral zone, the depression, confusion bit in the middle, to respond to creative opportunities, to try new things, to make things better. And to have the wisdom as leaders to allow some experimentation when we're in the limbo
Yeah.
is really constructive.
Yes, not everything's going to work first time. And I was just reflecting on that if we do things in secret, if we do things without things, then the shock is going to be far worse. There's always going to be a little shock of what's the detail of the change. But if there's a discussion in the organization of, changes happening here and changes happening there, there's that constant thread of that organizational strategy. There's a constant thread of change is part of what we do as an organization. And therefore, when a change happens to a team, there'll be a shock about the detail, but it might be a slightly less roller coasterish. If we
Sure.
do things in secret, then it comes as a huge shock, and therefore the curve is much worse. You'll find the denial is worse. The anger is much more extreme. If I give a real illustration, this actually happened to me. The organization where I worked for decided they would reorganize, and rather having people scattered in 3 places for administration, kind of field admin and central admin, they would shut the field admin office and move everybody to the head office. This is the only time that the management team kept a secret in that organization. And so none of us knew where it came from. And at our end of year celebration and performance review and Christmas party, essentially the message was, this has been the best year ever, we're going to shut your office in 4 months' time. And nobody have explained the driving forces behind it. And so the shock was immense. And the mistrust from the audience to the organization was significant. Quite a lot of anger, you might have guessed from that illustration. And at that point, the organization has got to do a lot more to catch up with, to get people on side, because there's going to be a lot more resistance. People are going to be less willing to move. Which brings us kind of neatly to the fact that everyone's going to react differently to a change. People react at different speeds to change as we go through. And Roger's innovation curve is a nice kind of model for this. That we have our innovators who come up with the ideas, the suggestions, they're the guiding lights of what goes on. And they, of course, will influence the early adopters who look at those and go, that's fantastic. And what we're trying to then do is get a large lump of people, the early majority, to go, oh, we've got a few questions and a few queries. Our late majority, of course, will only ever move once it's a kind of fait accompli, that there's no going back. But we still have our laggards who will resist, who will look at those sorts and kind of go, do I really want to? And they will have to be pulled along and enabled. And one of the things about this is that if we look at change teams and change professionals, generally, we're to the left-hand side of this. We're the innovators, we're the early adopters. We are involved in change because it's interesting, it's challenging. It allows us to talk to people, to engage, to think about strategy, all of those lovely, exciting things. And of course, we're then moving it onto the others. And when we come to the laggards, if as a change team, you look at the people at the back and you go, oh, you're just resisting, you're just sticking in the mud, you're doing it because it's what they've always done. And the laggard attitude might be, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, while we're doing those sorts of things. But they can move and they will move, but we need to support them in the process. Interestingly, they might look at us as the innovators, early adopters, go, you like it because it's shiny. You're just a bunch of magpies. You're jumping at the latest things. What's interesting here is that sometimes we're not the right people to communicate with everybody else. We're not the right people to sell this idea. And so when we start thinking about change and how we communicate change and how we support people through change, one of the things here is that, am I the right person to go and do this? Am I the right person to talk to this group of people about change? And therefore, do I find other people to go and do this? Do I go and find other people? And you may find that the laggards, the people who are slow to change, are best being supported and looked after by people from the late majority. So our change agents, our support mechanisms, are they changing as we go through the organization? And again, if I give you a quick example of this, when I worked at the water company previously, we had a training program called The Journey, which was an action center group. And the idea was that you came together as a group, you defined what you wanted to learn and how you'd learn it, and the organization would then support you to go and do it. And when they launched it, all of the teams who went on the journey were either management teams or white collar teams. And as an organisation, that's a relatively small percentage of our audience. And none of the operational staff, the blue collar teams, if you like, looked at that and went, that's for us. Because there was nobody like them doing it. And so what they actually went out and they found, and normally it was a self-contained team of people who normally work together, defined what they do, and they did it as a unit because they were already a team. And they couldn't find one of those. So they went out and recruited 7 individuals who worked across the operational environment who were kind of raised an interest, but the rest of their team weren't. And they brought them together and said, would you like to do it as a group? There were 7 of them, and they worked low down in the organisation. Now, every team gave itself a nickname. So you can gather that this team immediately called themselves the Dwarves, because there were 7 of them, and they work at the front line. But what was interesting was that when they'd done it, and they did a lot of things about organisational strategy. They wanted to know about finance and organisational strategy, but they never got introduced to. So, things that, aren't in your remit, but allow them to understand the organisation, how the organisation went. So they met with finance people, they talked to the directors, they got some presentation skills training. They talked to us trainers quite a lot about different things that we did and why we did it. And if we wanted to advertise the journey to anybody, it wasn't one of the management teams that went out. We had one of the dwarves came out and talked to people. And because it was somebody like them talking to them, it had much better impact. And interesting, there was a long-term benefit to the organization, which is when we were doing subsequent changes, if you were delivering a presentation to an operational team about a change that was going to happen, if you had one of the dwarves in the audience, their colleagues would feed questions to the dwarf, who was not afraid to ask questions of a presenter at the front, was not afraid of challenging a director or a manager. And because you've got a conduit, some of them to talk to, we got better conversations, we got better dialogue, we got better involvement. And so there was a huge value to understanding that. And that made quite a significant change in some of the cultural aspects of the organization.
I think one of the key things that comes out of the examples you've given, Andy, is the value of a good, well-embedded change agent network. And I could replicate that absolutely from my experience. A major shift within I have to be careful about identification here. Major shift of culture within a financial sector IT organization of around 1800 people. One of the key levers that we were able to pull to help through a very substantial change of focus was to ask each of the heads of function, board members in any other organization, for a sample of not just anybody, but their best people from a range of the different teams who could be trained to understand change and who could be trained to act as consultants and facilitators for their colleagues, so that they became a focus for problem solving locally as the changes were implemented. So that there was resource built into each line manager's area. Again, people like us from the colleagues, but who had learnt and built credibility around some, in that case, process improvement tools, so that they were able to make things work. And that certainly did shift the dial hugely.
And what it does is it moves people more to the left, because as an organization you become much more agile because you have that capability as an organization. It's that change is part of what we do as an organization. In fact, one of the first organizations I worked for did a very similar thing. Everybody was trained in problem solving. Change is everybody's job in the organization. And that's quite a significant thing. That was quite a few years ago. So they were quite ahead of the curve on that kind of idea. Sure. And everyone was trained in problem solving and process improvement things. And in everyone's appraisal, what have you implemented as a change this year? It became part of what we do as an organization. And it encouraged a lot. Yes.
Sorry,
It encouraged people to look for things, to go, I'm not very happy with this. Can I do something about it? And that became quite a powerful thing in there. In my team, I had a poster up that said, the reasonable person adapts themselves to their environment. Therefore, all change is due to the unreasonable person. And my team used to walk up to me and go, "Boss, I'm going to be unreasonable." I used to go, "Fantastic. What are we going unreasonable about today?" And
That's a nice touch. And again, part of the job of an effective change manager received training in would be to build these change agent teams and networks within and support the network within the organization, not in conflict in any way to
no,
the governance structures, to management structures, but as a support to that and to act as a link between senior and more junior folk in the organization. I think there's just one other thing I want to add to your comment is the observation, which is important for senior leadership, that research suggests that people to be engaged with change in communication terms need to hear about the change from two directions. One is the senior level,
yeah,
from top management, because they believe that that is the direction that that the organization will go.
yes,
But they also need to hear about it consistently from their own immediate line manager,
yeah,
who can make the overall direction real to them. And
yes,
helping with that line of communication is again something that change managers support line managers in, and also make sure that there's upwards as well as downwards communication about such issues.
yes. And what we're talking about there by having those change agents embedded across that kind of volunteer army. It's the
Yeah,
thing that builds the capability in the organisation that helps us
yeah,
move forward. And in a lot of ways, this is part of, therefore, the effective change process. It's what's going to make a change more likely, which is what Beckard and Harris were talking about when we start to look at their change formula. Is this change more likely to happen? Is the sum of A, B, and D, or the multiplication of A, B, and D, going to be greater than X as we go through? Do we have a better chance we're going to do it? And I always think this is an interesting model for both. Do we have a sense of motivation or a sense of resistance about this? Your
oh,
thoughts
sorry,
first?
I thought you were going to go on to say more.
I'll let you do the first bit.
Okay, this was this mathematical model. It is only a model, and like all models, it's very helpful as a way of getting insight into something. I grew up in Derby, and Rolls-Royce Aerospace headquarters was in Derby, and they had wind tunnels there, and they would put turbine blades and things into wind tunnels to see how they reacted. The
Yeah,
turbine blades they put in there were usually made of plywood, because what they wanted to understand was the form rather than, but you wouldn't put that turbine blade into an engine and
no,
fly across the Atlantic with it. It's a
no,
model for a purpose. So just a
yes,
caution about any model that we
yeah,
use in business, uh, don't try to fly the Atlantic with it. But this model is helpful because it identifies some key factors that, if we get them right, can help people to overcome any anxieties and resistances about change. So change will happen, this model suggests, only if A, there's a level of dissatisfaction with the way things are now.
yep,
Um, I need to feel that there is something about the way things are now that I'm uncomfortable with. The second thing, the B, is about the desirability of the end state. Is there something in the future state that has been communicated to me that I actually find attractive? And the third factor, shown as D here, is about the practicality of the change. How disruptive is it going to be for me?
yeah,
Minimum disruption. So if all those three things together are greater than what it will cost me to go through this change, then I'm likely to be up for the change.
yes.
Um, and just sorry, and just to finish,
Uh,
the fact that those A, B, and D are multiples, if any of those is at or close to zero, like there's no
yes,
dissatisfaction, or
yeah,
the end state doesn't really turn me on, or I can't see a practical way for me to engage with this, then the whole right-hand side of the equation is zero and change is less likely to happen, at least for
Yeah.
me. And if you put this up to the group level, to the organization level, same applies.
Yes, and it's an interesting one. I always think it starts to encourage you to think about doing certain things. So, if there is no dissatisfaction now, let's engage. Let's talk to people. Okay, why are you happy? What are you happy with? What works? If the organization increases in performance and throughput, will the tools and systems you've got, will they cope with that? And so there may be no current dissatisfaction, but there may be some future dissatisfaction. Again, but if we talk about change beforehand, then the organizations, the staff and the people impacted start to go, there's a forward-looking aspect to this. We're not waiting until we're in the mire and trying to get out of it. We're trying to think, let's go round the mire, which is always a kind of trust thing again with the organization. And if we talk about co-design again, desirability. Have I got skin in the game? My idea is part of that solution. The practicality one you mentioned, we mentioned it earlier on when we were chatting about these things beforehand, and it reminded me of an instance. And I was working with a large organization, and we were talking about planning and when things are going to happen. And they were talking about a particular project that was due to happen in the organization. And what it was a brand new finance system. And somebody at the top of the organization said, I think we should start the new financial year with a new finance system. Let's launch it on the 4th of April. Yes, that was my reaction as well, because all through March, when they're busily trying to shut down last year's accounts and do the accruals and all the things you need to do to tie it up, they've got to go into training and data conversion. And then in the early part of the year, when they're sorting out who's going to spend money on what and all that kind of strategic planning, they're dealing with the disruption of, I don't know how to use this system and what goes in here. And I raised it as a question. They said, this has been decided. And so I very carefully raised them a risk, which I asked them to put on their risk register, to do with, is this a good time to do it? Is this the most practical time to do it? Would it be better to have done it 6 months in, and therefore we can deal with all the teething troubles when it's not quite so manic, and therefore when we come to the new financial year, actually it's a much smoother process. But it's those sorts of things. Again, if we engage with people, when are they busiest? When do they have time for this? When's not a good time to go and do it? And that's about, again, it's about the volatile world in which they work. It is about the ambiguity, the complexity of the world in which they work. How practical is this to really go and do it? And if we're asking those questions, then our delivery mechanisms and our change management coincide and work with those kind of the audience's expectations. And that became, I thought, an important tie back to what's going on. You work in a constantly evolving world. Is there a good time to do this? Are there peaks and troughs of work? In which case, is this really the best time? And so 2 of those measures are really about co-change. And one of those measures is understanding the environment. It's understanding where we are. And I guess it's understanding that kind of VUCA world as it affects our organization and the teams and functions within it.
Sure. I mean, I think we should be winding up really, but the significant thing is that where the world is volatile, what we need to provide for people is a sense of vision, a sense of direction that will enable them to reduce the uncertainty levels and sense we know where we are going. Uncertainty, generating understanding, dealing with complexity by offering clarity, and dealing with ambiguity by offering agility, responsiveness to the particular things. Now, look, those things in the right-hand column are a neat analog for the things on the match for the things on the left. A guy called Bob Johansen, 15 years ago, suggested them as antidotes to the problems of the world that we face. But I think for me, the critical thing is that if you are involved in delivering change as organizational change leadership from the top, then, or if you're involved in change as a change manager within the body of the organization, understanding how to generate vision for people so they have a sense of direction, helping them to understand the change and how it'll affect them and how they can engage with it. There's all the stuff we've talked about there.
Yeah.
Giving a clarity about the steps, the plan, the way forward, and doing it in an agile way that people can see as responding to the next things that come along in a planned and constructive way. Those are things that good change management can offer. And I that what you've been sharing today, Andy, and maybe some of the things that I've said too will resonate for the people who are with us today, and we'll find out in a few minutes in the Q&A, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And it's kind of the vision. Are we good at that strategic planning? Do we know where we're going as an organization? And are we showing why we've got to move? So there's understanding and clarity about the driving forces and the direction of travel, because that allows people to understand the nature of the organization and the world in which it operates. And of course, then having the appropriate capabilities as an organization to react in terms of agility. Are we doing the right change at the right time in the right way? And we're not afraid to make tough decisions, I think. And that's sometimes about the agility is we can make those decisions because we need to do so. We need to do so now. And therefore we can react to things like the volatility by being agile as well. So they cross-refer to each other as we go through. But I think that brings us to the end of our discussion. Thank you, Richard. This has been really good fun, actually.
Oh, like rubbing the lamp, the genie appears in the middle. Hello.
Yeah, here I am. Thank you very much, both. That was really, really insightful, and hopefully everyone has really enjoyed it. We're a bit tight for time now, so I'm just going to keep mine a bit short and sweet so we can crack on with the Q&A, because we've already had quite a few good questions come through, so I want to make sure we've got time for that. But it wouldn't be an ILX webinar without a reminder that we are here to help you and your teams with training courses and knowledge building and skills development that can help you to thrive in these challenging environments that Andy and Richard have just talked about. So the first one I'm going to talk about is change management. This course covers stakeholder engagement, communication, managing resistance, all of that good stuff to help you lead and support successful organisational change initiatives. This did recently undergo an update. So version 3's got a lot of new additions, including advice on the use of metrics and data analytics and change, guidance on building soft skills, and a greater focus on the idea that change is a more continuous process. So if you're interested in finding out more of the changes, Andy here actually ran a webinar for us a couple of months ago, which is still on our YouTube channel. So you can watch that back, and there's loads more interesting insights about the updates and the changes that have happened for that one over there. We also have Agile Change Agent, which is a bit more designed for people that are working in agile environments. So I'm sure a lot of you are working with agile projects. And this one will help you sort of understand those frameworks such as Scrum and Kanban and how you can lead change initiatives within those environments. Then finally, we have managing benefits. You know how to manage change initiatives, but how do you really maximize the benefits that you can get from them? This course will give you a structured approach to benefits management, helping you to identify, optimize, and sustain the value of change initiatives. As you can see, we have all of these courses available in a multitude of study options, e-learning, classroom, live virtual classroom, blended and on-site delivery. So we can really tailor the course to meet your needs and the business training needs and the desires of your learners and how they learn best. In addition to our change courses, we've also got a range of professional skills courses. So these are designed to develop valuable soft and transferable skills. There's a list on the slide here which we thought best suited the topics that we discussed in today's webinar, but there are loads more available over on our website, so you can find out a lot more information about those over there. So building and managing stakeholder relationships, I'm sure you all know what those are already. Leading during periods of change, again, sort of says what it is on the tin. Difficult conversations made easy, gives a bit more tools for navigating sort of challenging conversations, whether that's with stakeholders or internal team members. Then authenticity, focus and confidence will teach you strategies to improve personal effectiveness and strengthen your presence in the workplace. And finally, secret life of the brain, which I think is a really good one for change professionals, because it's all about emotional intelligence and how you can understand others, which are really important skills trying to navigate and embed change and sort of deal with resistance. So yeah, that's all from me. A quick whiz through of some of our courses there. But as I said, there's loads more information over on our website, or you can also speak to your relationship manager. If you have any questions about those, they'll be able to give you more information. Now, time for the Q&A. So I will start. We've had a few questions already come through, so I'll start with those. But if you do have any more questions, please do just pop them in the question box. We are quite tight on time. I'm quite happy to run over a little bit. Hopefully, Richard and Andy, I'm sure you are as well. But if you do need to drop off, a reminder: the session is being recorded, so that will be available on YouTube. So if you miss any of it, you can watch it all back over there. So right,
Andy, that means that we need to be concise.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. If you could keep them to the point, that would be great. So the first question is, could you talk a little bit about how change management works differently within Agile versus waterfall projects, if there is any difference at all?
Do you want to take that, Andy?
I'd say that the principles are the same, because it's still about engagement, it's still about co-design. With an agile environment, clearly you're working to short, repetitive deliveries every time books, every sprint, and therefore importantly what we need to do is engage early and effectively, because we're going to have quite short periods to get people ready for each of those increments as we go through. So you need the same skills, but your agility here in the change team is the time scale in which you need to do it. So it needs quite a focus. It needs a lot of engagement early, so that people are prepared for the first one, and then we can start rolling again, the first, done the second, done the third. So we need to think about it much earlier. To be concise.
I'd add one thing to that, and that is the need for change professionals to be engaged in an ongoing basis in trust building, because in an agile environment, the change is a continuous change environment, and
yes,
that relies on trust. So having people around who can help to build that trust and to sustain it, and as you say, who can respond very quickly to the changes, so short-term, quick changes, but underpinned by long-term relationship, that works.
Yes.
Great. So Joe has said, many of the changes that we need to implement may have benefits for the organisation, but they might have a negative impact on the individual, such as, Andy, I think you mentioned previously, sort of job changes or losses potentially. Are there any specific tools or theories that can be used to try and maintain motivation and involvement for those individuals who might be a bit worried about the negative impacts it could have?
A personal example, I needed on one occasion to close down the team that I was working for, because that whole section of the organisation was moving. All I can say is that the relationships within that team post the initial shock were sustained actually over the years that followed, people wanting to come back together to catch up with each other. And that was essentially about managing the relationships with the individuals concerned, being truthful with them about what was happening, about why it was happening, and then working with them to look for best options. A very major FMCG company that was going to close down a factory gave good advance notice of it, and then invested in having even job centres opened within the factory so that people were able to be supported. So it's about creativity, it's about seeing where you can help people to retain status, to retain autonomy. So you're not trashing people, you're not doing things to them any more than you can help. You're giving them as much certainty as you can, and that you sustain trust with them, and you deal with them fairly. If you can manage those things, which are all taught within the course as part of the neuroscience for change within the APMG change management course, those are the things that you can do to mitigate the impact on people.
Yeah, I'd just kind of echo and go, it's honesty, openness, and clarity. Why is this having to happen? So that people can understand the circumstances. And lots of support, lots and lots of support.
Cool, perfect. I think this should be a quick one, but Richard, this was about one of the points you mentioned. Someone's just asked who the author of the 4 Ps was. If you could just clarify that.
It's William Bridges in his book Managing Transition.
Perfect. Let me find another one. Got lots coming through, so just trying to keep up with all of them. How can change managers, leaders, organisations manage or deal with change fatigue? That one's from Charles.
One of the things that I would say, and Andy will have some examples of this, I suspect, is the whole area of psychological safety comes into this. These things overlap with one another, but where there is change upon change upon change, it will remain about relationship, and it will remain about people feeling that their needs for cadence, for rhythm in their working life are being respected. And frankly, if you simply pile one change on top of another, people will crack ultimately. And actually working with people to figure out how you manage the cadences of change, the highs and lows, is the only way through that. If you're simply going to dump it on people, then good luck. I don't think you're going to make it work.
No, absolutely not. I would add there's often a kind of organizational kind of capacity. How much change can we cope with as an organization? And are we just trying to achieve too much too short? So this will bump into things like strategic planning, into portfolio management, to understand the kind of nature of the organization, of the business as usual environment, the volatility again, about what's happening in the world. What capability, what knowledge and skill do we have in supporting change? How good a change agent network do we have? And if as an organization we have a good change agent network, we have lots of support mechanisms, and we're good at delivery and good at support, we can probably cope with far more. If those things aren't in place, then absolutely as Richard said, we're just waiting for people to crack. And so as an organization, we have to look back at ourselves and kind of go, what's appropriate? How much can we cope with? What's an appropriate amount of change for ourselves? And to be honest.
No, sorry, Sir Andy, finish your sentence. I thought you had. We've got a slight delay on the line, and that made it difficult. What I was going to add is a specific tool. If you do heat maps of multiple changes, and particularly if you get the people who are going to be affected by those changes to workshop what's coming, how it will affect different people, and let them build the heat maps, you're doing what you can to restore a degree of agency to people. You're giving them status. You're doing all the right things to feed their needs for security. And if you can, build and use heat maps, but best of all, facilitate people doing those heat maps so that the people who are going to be affected build them and they have some control over the pace at which things hit, and they'll back each other up. They really will.
Yeah, the stakeholder impact assessment section in the change management study guide is a really good tool to have a look at this. It allows you to understand really how big the change is and how it affects different communities, and therefore, how much community you deal with, and that moves into the kind of the severity of it and the severity assessment of the change. As Richard says, absolutely involving the people impacted rather than making decisions for them. Agency, we have some control of what's going on.
Perfect. We did also actually recently just have a blog go live on the ILX website about managing change fatigue. So you can also read that in the resources hub on our website. So hopefully that will be able to provide some tips too. Another question. I'm gonna just we've had quite a lot of questions, unfortunately, so I don't think we're going to get a chance to go through all of them. So I'll just do another 2 or 3. If you do need to drop off, I appreciate we've gone off time, so feel free to drop off if you do need to, but obviously stick around if you can. So the next one is about if decision makers don't fully understand the impact of change management, how can you kind of get them on board and convince them that it's not just a nice to have, it is an essential element?
Like a cri de coeur, that one. How can I get my boss to respect what I need to do? The best change managers, I would say, are often the ones with another job offer in their back pocket. I shouldn't say that online, that's naughty. I think more to the point, help. I think the key is identifying what are the rub points for particular changes,
Mhm.
figuring out where the biggest risks are, and present it to decision makers as risk issues, and then show how you can help to mitigate those risks. I think that's the best quick answer I could give.
Yeah, and if you're looking organisationally, do we understand what we need to improve? One of the things you do is a kind of capability model assessment of what are we good at as an organisation. One of the things you might be looking for is kind of narrative stories about we do lots of changes, but we don't get very much benefit out of them. We do lots of changes and people complain all the time. And if you're getting those sorts of conversations, that probably tells you that A, change management is not particularly effective, and B, you may not be doing benefit management very particularly well. And both of those things might need to be looked at because one flows into the other. And so there are a number of kind of broader tools you might consider, but there is a change management capability model, and that would be an interesting one that says, well, are we any good at this? Are there a few bright sparks, but nobody else is thinking about it? Or are we as an organization optimizing what we do in terms of change?
And strategically, the Change Management Institute publishes a organizational change management maturity model. And sometimes it can be a bit of a shock to senior managers to see that they are at scale 0 or 1 on the maturity. And
Yeah,
if that finding benchmarks across the industry can sometimes just be a bit of a we're lagging, and can
yes,
help to promote effective change management.
yeah.
Great, thank you. The next question says, on the adoption curve, who often makes up the innovators? Is it typically senior managers, planning teams, etc., or can it vary from initiative to initiative?
Andy, yours?
It's interesting. The innovators in an organization can be anywhere. And it's what do we do as an organization about encouraging people to come up with ideas. So in the study go talk about idea generators, people who come up with those sorts of ideas. It's how do we capture them and use them. One of the things you will find is that if you don't have senior management who are willing to listen to the innovators in the early adopters one, lots of those ideas are lost because they don't permeate into the organization, they don't get that kind of traction, and therefore you lose them. And what happens is that innovators, where they're having lots of ideas they're not being listened to, sooner or later get bored and go and find somewhere else where they are being listened to. And you start to lose that innovation, that kind of thought process. So one of the things here is, do we encourage our organization, do we encourage our people to have ideas, to suggest changes, and do we listen? Not all ideas come from the top of the organization. Although one of the organizations I worked for, when I first worked for them, that was very much almost the kind of culture. All ideas come from the head office. And if you worked out in the field like I did, then you were just there to do, you weren't ready to think. And my manager actually told us that as a team. We did a bit of a culture change in that organization, and they went back to changes everybody's idea, which is a significant cultural change in the organization from being centralized to everyone has ideas. But it changed working for the organization significantly. It was so much more engaging because you could do things, you could change things, you were listened to.
One thing I'll just add, Andy, is that when you talked about the Rogers innovation adoption curve, we talked then about change agent networks And I would say that building and sustaining a good network of agents across the organisation can help the organisation to be change ready, and therefore it becomes easier and smoother for each initiative.
Yeah, I've got someone I can go and talk to about this stuff who has a network.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much both for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us. I think we're going to have to wrap it up now. We could go on for ages otherwise. So I'm going to have to draw it to a close, unfortunately. But it's been a great session. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions. It's good.
Yes.
Thank you everyone for sending
Absolutely.
in your questions. We hope you enjoyed the session and you found it useful. As I've mentioned, it will be recorded and this will be available on YouTube later today, and you'll be sent an email tomorrow with the link to that, so you'll be able to access it back and watch it back. I know a few people were asking if that was the case, so yes, you will be able to access that. So yeah, thanks again, and I hope you all have a lovely day. Yeah, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, folks. Bye-bye.